I'm Harrison Blackwell and you're watching Info Safari. Today we'll delve into the hypocrisy within the world's largest democracy. But before we begin, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Ahimsa, the principle of non-violence, is a core value in Hinduism, emphasizing compassion, kindness and respect for all living beings. It teaches adherents to avoid harm through thoughts, words or actions, promoting peace and understanding. Many Hindus therefore choose to practice vegetarianism, with a particular reverence for cows, which are seen as sacred. The consumption of beef is often viewed as sinful because it contradicts this belief. However, in the context of modern-day India, there exists a significant contradiction and hypocrisy that goes beyond mere religious practices. While the idea of protecting cows is presented as a moral stand, the reality is far more complex, and it's wrapped in politics. Over the years there has been growing tension and violence between Hindus and Muslims, particularly regarding beef consumption. The political climate, fueled by certain Hindu extremists and politicians, has used the issue of cow slaughter to target Muslims, painting them as villains in the beef trade. But here's the twist. While these extremists and politicians claim to defend cows and uphold ahimsa, the truth is that they're manipulating the situation for political gain. The real issue here is not the beef trade itself, but the way this controversy has been weaponized to create division and suffering for the Muslim minority. Hindu extremists have sought to exploit this narrative, turning a legitimate business into a political tool to suppress Muslims who are falsely branded as the primary culprits. Bollywood has always been used as a tool for Hindus to push propaganda against minorities. Despite the constant portrayal of Muslims as the main players in the beef trade, the reality is far different. In fact, the largest beef exporters in India are Hindus, some of whom are deeply involved in the industry. India stands as the world's largest exporter of buffalo meat, responsible for 23.5% of global meat exports. In 2023, India even surpassed the United States to become the third largest exporter of beef. The largest slaughterhouses responsible for this massive trade are also owned and operated by Hindus. So if anyone should be blamed for the beef trade, it would be the very same Hindu businessmen who dominate this industry. Yet, in a display of hypocrisy, Hindu extremists and politicians continue to use cow slaughter as a wedge to drive a deep divide between Hindus and Muslims. They accuse Muslims of being the primary perpetrators of beef consumption, even though the largest players in this market are Hindus. This is a carefully orchestrated political stunt aimed at dehumanizing Muslims and inciting violence against them. These politicians and extremists exploit religious sentiments to maintain their power and control, often through divisive rhetoric and false narratives. To make matters worse, these individuals who claim to follow ahimsa, the principle of non-violence, are themselves complicit in violence. While they profess to uphold the sanctity of life, they are willing to profit from the killing of animals and, in some cases, even condone violence against humans. The same politicians and extremists who accuse Muslims of killing cows are often the ones behind the violence and harassment against those they claim to protect. They hide behind their so-called religious purity, while engaging in the very acts of violence they condemn in others. Take, for instance, Al-Kabir, the largest slaughterhouse in India, owned by S. Subawal. Located in Telangana, Al-Kabir is the biggest exporter of beef in the country. Subawal himself openly states that religion and business should be kept separate. He doesn't view his involvement in the beef industry as contradictory to his Hindu identity. He even points out that there is no issue with Hindus being involved in the beef trade. This sentiment is shared by other businessmen who argue that religion has no place in business. Companies like Arabian Exporters, MKR Frozen Food and Al Noor Exporters, all major players in the beef export industry, are all owned by Hindus. It's clear that these Hindu businessmen are not doing anything wrong in terms of their business practices. They are simply engaging in commerce as any other entrepreneur would. What is wrong, however, is the way in which Indian politicians and extremists have manipulated this business for their own political purposes. They use cow slaughter as a tool to paint Muslims as villains, to dehumanize them, and to justify violence against them. In this twisted narrative, the real culprits, the Hindu businessmen profiting from the beef trade, are left untouched, while Muslims are unfairly vilified. The truth is that the beef trade in India is largely driven by economic interests, not religious motivations. The businessmen involved in this industry, many of whom are Hindus, have no qualms about participating in an industry that technically goes against the principle of ahimsa. They justify their actions by claiming that religion should not influence business. At the same time, however, extremist politicians and certain segments of society have used the issue of cow slaughter as a tool to target Muslims, who are falsely portrayed as the primary offenders. In the end, the hypocrisy is evident. While Hindu businessmen continue to dominate the beef export industry, the narrative pushed by politicians and extremists paints Muslims as the sole perpetrators of cow slaughter. This politically motivated scapegoating has led to widespread violence and suffering, with Muslims bearing the brunt of the consequences. Meanwhile, the true culprits, those who profit from the beef trade, continue to operate with impunity, hiding behind the veil of religious purity. The real violence is not just against the animals, but against the very fabric of Indian society, which is torn apart by political manipulation and the exploitation of religious sentiments. So while some Hindus may claim to follow ahimsa, the reality is that the true violence in India today is not about cow slaughter alone. It's about the political and social forces that use religion to divide, conquer and suppress. These forces don't care about the sanctity of life, they care about maintaining their power. And in this narrative, it's the Muslims who are being made to suffer, all for a political stunt that has little to do with true religious values or morality.